After Iran's broken exit from the 8-year war with Iraq shedding the poison cup according to Khomeini, Iran worked to rebuild the infrastructure that the war had destroyed in various industrial, economic, scientific and military sectors in particular, and was engaged in formulating a new strategy throughout the region, based on to prevent any threat to it, whether from the neighboring regional countries or the Middle East. In other words, the relentless and deliberate pursuit of expanding its influence and expansion in several directions to prevent a repeat of the scenario of risking the future of the Islamic Revolution and the power of its ruling regime. Fate wished for the Iranian approach to coincide with the American trend, in order for the Iranian interest to meet the American interest represented in Washington's attempt to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime in 2003. Here came the golden opportunity for Iran to intervene in Iraqi affairs and work to consolidate the Shiite influence in it. It expanded the base of Shiite political forces inside Iraq, urging them to adhere to the mentality of not losing power, devoting all its political, security and financial efforts to achieve this goal, which included allocating huge budgets to support Iraqi figures and symbols known to them in accordance with the principle of ensuring loyalty and not leaving the circle of control and control. And it pushed those who are qualified to be a power project towards the forefront of the political scene and supported it with all means of presence and competition with opposites, meaning that Iran planned from an early age to strengthen, support and develop a ruling Shiite political class to assume leadership of Iraq. Iran has worked on several parallel axes to influence and try to control the Iraqi decision by dealing directly with the new Iraqi leaders who dealt with Iran at the time of the opposition. There are parties that confronted the political scene with Iranian financial and logistical support, which ensured that after these parties won the elections, Iran was keen on preserving Iranian interests not only inside Iraq, even outside of it. When ISIS emerged in 2014 and occupied about a third of the area of Iraq and tightened its control over major cities in the north, west and central Iraq, and what this sudden occupation posed as a serious threat that reached the capital Baghdad and the cities of Karbala and Najaf, Iran rushed to support Iraq with weapons, equipment, experts, and advisors. And on top of them is General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds force who led the war against ISIS with the Popular Mobilization Forces, most of which are armed factions loyal to Tehran. Soleimani was the spiritual father and the direct military and ideological leader of these factions. After the end of the ISIS war, some of these factions turned into political movements in a step intended to expand the Shiite power base sympathetic to Tehran, so it ran in the 2018 elections and won, as expected, due to two factors: the Iraqi streets' awareness of its role in eliminating the threat of ISIS, and Iranian support unlimited her to run in the election adventure. so it had a wide and influential representation in the Iraqi parliament, and it was not satisfied with that. In fact, it quickly formed a strong coalition after the elections, called the Al-Fatah Alliance, which has about 45 seats. This alliance was the nucleus of a larger coalition called the Al-Baynat Alliance, to later lead the Iraqi political scene and still remain. Of course, the Al-Baynat Alliance had a major role in choosing the Speaker of Parliament and naming the Prime Minister. He also worked on enacting a new law for a new military institution synonymous with the military institution under the title the Popular Mobilization Authority and providing it with a large budget starting from the year 2019. The components and factions within the Baynat Alliance also acquired an abundant share of ministerial seats, positions, and important higher levels of employment in the state. All of this was reflected in the benefits of Iran, and these ministries and influential sites helped to radically strengthen economic relations with Tehran. The volume of Iranian exports to Iraq reached about $15 billion. When the dispute between America and Iran intensified following the missile attack that targeted Qasem Soleimani and the deputy head of the Popular Mobilization Authority, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, near Baghdad International Airport, the Al-Baynat Alliance adopted a parliamentary resolution calling for the removal of foreign forces from Iraq, specifically intended for U.S. forces. This decision was based on a consensus between the pro-Iraqi side in favor of relations with Tehran, and the demands of the Iranian leadership calling for the removal of U.S. forces from Iraq. It is noteworthy that Iran has strong relations with other components, such as the Sunnis and the Kurds, and has close ties to some Sunni political forces and ruling Kurdish parties, and it can work with it in a way that serves its interests at the local and regional levels. The equation of Iranian influence changed after two important events, the first of which was the outbreak of massive demonstrations in an unprecedented way in Baghdad and the cities of central and southern Iraq in October 2019 and continuing to this day. The second is the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, and their absence from the scene of events. The repercussions of the first event reached the point of hearing loud screams from Iraqi youth in Shiite cities, in the forefront of which is Najaf and Karbala. It denounces the Iranian presence and demands its disposal. Iran is righteousness. These chants were echoed by a segment of the young Shiite component, the unemployed and those missing the simplest services, and they see the negative influence of Iran and its support for the parties that topped the political scene despite their failure to provide services, provide jobs, and rebuild Iraq's cities destroyed by the series of wars, neglect and rampant corruption. The absence of Soleimani and Muhandis greatly affected the strength of the Iranian presence in the Iraqi arena, and it seemed difficult to occupy their place and compensate for the significant influence they enjoyed in the Shiite and popular political milieu alike, as they are considered pillars of planning and implementing Iranian policy in Iraq and the Middle East. Perhaps the absence of the engineer has a greater impact on the Iraqi scene, and it is not easy to find a suitable alternative to compensate for his absence, and he has been known for his ability to bring the armed factions under one roof and agree on one word. In addition to his influence on the government decision because he is the vice president of the Popular Mobilization Authority and one of the pillars of the Security and Defense Council, which is the highest authority that controls the security and military decisions in the country. In addition to the strength of his political presence, due to his strong links with the leaders of the Construction Alliance and the forces under its banner, so that those forces and factions have not yet found anyone to occupy his place. On the other hand, there is a difference in visions about the future of politics in Iraq. Whereas, Iran is based on the principle of wilaya al-faqih, while the authority in Najaf does not agree with this approach. And Mr. Ali al-Sistani had previously opposed Iraq's commitment to the guardianship of the jurist, and worked hard to reduce Iranian influence within the seminary in Najaf and cut off the path for Iraq's involvement in Iran's regional and international conflicts through Friday sermons delivered on his behalf by his representative. Whether in Najaf or Karbala, there are many examples of this difference. For example, the leader Ali Khomeini called for the removal of foreign forces from Iraq and the region in his sermon on January 17, and pressure was applied following this call to the House of Representatives and the government to activate the parliament's decision to remove the American forces. Al-Sistani said in his Friday sermon, January 31, saying, "It is imperative that early elections be held so that the people can say their word, and the next parliament, which is based on its free will, is concerned with taking the necessary steps for reform and issuing crucial decisions that define the country's future, especially with regard to preserving its sovereignty and the independence of its political decision, and its unity, land and people." At that time, attempts to drag Parliament towards a fateful decision that was not subject to internal or external influences and pressures stopped. There is no doubt that Iran is now in the process of reviewing its regional policy, in preparation for drawing roles, identifying tools, and creating new influencing factors, and most importantly, studying how to deal with the Iraqi interior and the region in light of the ongoing conflict with the countries of the region and America. Not to mention that the Iranian economy is now weaker than ever before, and the Iranian people are suffering from the repercussions of the U.S. sanctions imposed on Tehran, so the Iranian leadership has become preoccupied with recalculating its accounts in every situation. Al-Mayadeen, and in Iraq in particular, is evidenced by its non-interference in the formation of the upcoming government of Muhammad Tawfiq Alawi, unlike its usual, when its fingerprints were evident in all successive Iraqi governments. After Iran's broken exit from the 8-year war with Iraq shedding the poison cup